Welcome to the Social Engineer Podcast, a security awareness series. This is episode 207, if you can believe that. We're well out of the 200s now. I'm Chris Hadnaghi, CEO and founder of Social Engineer LLC, the Innocent Lives Foundation, and the Institute for Social Engineering. And I've been hosting this podcast since way back when podcasts were done with cans and string in 2009. And I am joined by my trusty Scottish co-host, Ryan MacDougall. How are you, Ryan?
I'm great. Thanks, Chris. So I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Social Engineer. I'm also the co-trainer for our master's level social engineering and Red Team Labs offerings. So check those out. I've also taught multiple other classes for multiple years in several public and private settings. I've been in information security or information technology for almost 26 years. I had my son redo my math. So it's been 26 years, not 24 years. With the last 10 being focused on adversary simulation and security awareness.
I always do forget to update the bio like when years pass. So yeah. I think I've been in the industry for 17 years, for about 21 years now. I'll probably update that. That's a good reminder. Thanks, Ryan.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Math, that's not really strong at it, But I am really strong at social engineering. So if you're looking for anything to do with social engineering, you should go check out our brand new website, which has just been launched, social-engineer.com. Really excited about some of the things on there, which we're going to talk about. One of the big features on the website today, a new report that's out. We'll not give you any teasers on that just yet. But if you're a lot of people emailing in about our training schedule, looking for our new training schedule and our path to our certification. We kind of changed a lot of things there. So go check out our foundational application for social engineering class. There's two. There's one in Orlando in July and then one in Romania in September. We have our practical application for social engineering class, which is virtual. Our first one is coming up in June. So that will be done with Shelby and with Patrick. And we're working on a brand new class, which is our psychology of social engineering class, which there's no date for that yet, but they'll be out. And then we have a whole bunch of new things being offered. So just go check out the website, see what you're thinking about taking there. And of course, feel free to email in any questions that you may have. Okay, a couple other housekeeping announcements before we get started. If you're interested in social engineering and you love the topic, you just want to chat with people, you should hop on over to our Slack channel. I think we're up to about 1,500 people in there now. And each and every day, we're talking about all the aspects of social engineering. We even have people that do the work for a living. They come in to get pretext help. We have a group that gets together twice a month, and they do some practice sessions to help with communications. There's just really a lot of things going on. We're on a job board. I think we've had about 9 or 10 people now find work through our job board there on the Slack channel. You can find the link in the show notes. And if you can't, you can hit me up on LinkedIn or hit Ryan up, and we'll be more than happy to get you a link to the Slack channel there. Also, everyone that's listening, please take a moment to go check out innocentlivesfoundation.org. I'm really proud of the team over there. If you're not familiar with our mission, we work closely with law enforcement. We're a non-vigilante group that works closely with law enforcement to help geolocate people who are trafficking children and creating child abuse material. And in the last 5.5 years of working with this organization, we've been privileged to work at over almost 500 cases. I think we're up to 490 something now. So almost 500 cases being handed into law enforcement, helping law enforcement agencies around the globe apprehend and track people who are hurting kids. If you can support our mission, you can do that in a couple ways. If you have the means to join us and in the fight, whether it's actually doing the OSINT or you have some other talents that you want to benefit the ILF with, you can volunteer. And of course, we're a nonprofit, a 501c3, so we'd be more than happy to accept donations because that helps us keep our mission going. You can find out more there at innocentlivesfoundation.org. And of course, last but not least, actually, it should be first, give a big shout out to Clutch, the favorite rock and roll band of everyone at Social Engineer. Actually, it's part of the hiring requirements. If you come here and you don't listen to Clutch, you can't work here, right, Ryan?
Yeah.
No, it's actually one of our core principles. So go check them out, pro-rock.com. You should definitely go to one of their live shows. That's the best way to take in their content. But they're huge supporters of ILF. Neil's on the board, and they have a lot of different things they've done for us over the years. So we're huge fans of them, as they are of the Innocent Lives Foundation. Okay, let's get to our topic for today. Now, you may be familiar with the person that we're going to be talking with because she's just perfect. That's what I was told today. Just perfect. I didn't even have to introduce her, because I was told that basically it's perfection, and that's Abbie, and it's not Ryan or I. But you may be familiar with her from the podcast that Abbie and I do together, which is the Doctor Is In series, where we talk about the different psychological aspects of how we make decisions and things that that really fascinate us about brains and the way that we think. But today we're talking about something even more exciting. But let me tell you a little bit about Abbie before we get into that. So she's a behavioral scientist. Usually I mess up her PhD. It's something like the astrophysics of mating newts or something like that. But, I think she has PhDs in many things thanks to me. But she did her PhD in behavior analysis and psychology. She became a professor of psychology at academic institutions by the age of 23. Thinking Doogie Howser, right? That's why we say she's perfect. It's just the way it is. Abbie was also awarded Reviewer of the Year in 2020 for her continued dedication to scientific best practices. And she's now the Director of Education here at Social Engineer. So we're really happy to have her part of our team. An active member of an internationally recognized research groups, an expert consultant and advisor. And she's also a public speaker. And she's been invited out a couple times already to give speeches on really fascinating topics. So if you're interested in hearing more about that, you can check out Abbie on the Social Engineer website under inviting a speaker out. She specializes in nonverbal communications, trust, and the psychological mechanisms underpinning human decision making. And that is nothing that we're talking about today, is it, Abbie?
It is not. Thank you for such a warm, slightly embarrassing welcome, Chris.
I can't help it. I was told by our podcast producer that I had to introduce her as being perfect. And, this is what I was told, that I have to listen to the podcast producer. He says, move over to the right a little. I got to move to the right, shut my phone off. I got to shut my phone off, introduce Abbie as perfect. I have to obey or bad things happen. So, Miss Perfection, first of all, what are we talking about today? What's our topic?
We are talking about the State of Vishing Report, or more specifically, the first ever State of Vishing Report.
Yeah, so I'm really excited about this. I know that in previous podcasts for years, I personally have talked about how excited I am about the data that we have here, our Vishing data. So for the last decade, we have been collecting and analyzing Vishing calls. And I'm really, really proud of our team here because I think from what we have seen in our research that we've done, we have the largest cache of Vishing data on Earth. It's really one of the vectors that is super hard to analyze because normally when someone gets attacked by a Vishing call, we're not able to analyze the call. It's not saved. It's not recorded. So we only know after the fact, after bad things have happened. And we have to do it all from memory. But thanks to our team here, we do thousands of Vishing calls for our clients every month. And we're able to code those calls, keep the data. And then when we hired someone like Abbie on, we were able to now take that data and have her look at it from a scientific perspective and see if there's anything that we can glean out of it that can help us. So we know that we have like the State of Vishing Report that comes out once a year. We have the State of Malware Report that comes out. Other companies produce those, not us. We have the Verizon DBIR report, and many of them touch on the idea of phone fraud, but none of them really analyze it to the level that we have. So, Abbie, before we get into like actually some of the cool findings, because that's now on our website, on the social-engineer.com website, you can download that for free. Tell us a little bit about the data set. What is it that we analyzed? Like how many calls did we have and how did we go about this research?
So we did a few different things. In terms of the actual Vishing calls, we had about 80,000 calls in total that we could go through and analyze that we've collected over the years. We looked for things like vulnerability factors. So what factors within that call make someone more likely to fall victim to information elicitation. But we also looked at protective factors. So what factors made someone resist information elicitation. But we didn't just stop there. We also collected other data that is publicly available that added to kind of understanding first what the threat landscape is, because there's so little done on such a big topic. Vishing is a huge topic. It's one of the easiest ways to get information from people, really. And it's one of the most critical factors, and we see it in the news all the time. But there is very limited research on it. There's no data out there on it. And the data that is out there on it is data that has been collected by academics in laboratory settings. So it's not authentic and it doesn't represent the real world and it does not represent true crime. So we wanted to first collect this understanding that the public has, because there's no understanding available to us in the literature. So we went onto Twitter and looked at, I think, 1.34 million tweets to see, well, we looked at all the tweets that had been made about vishing from 2019 to 2020, but we collected 1.34 million tweets on vishing. So it's a topic that so many people are talking about. And then we used this data to see what people are talking about in terms of vishing. And then we used our data to assess vulnerability and protective factors.
So what I find interesting is that sometimes, like when I go out and I give speeches on this topic, I still find there's a large number of people who don't even know what vishing is. Like they're not familiar with the term yet. So when we did the analysis on the 1.34 million tweets, what did we find was the understanding of this topic in general?
Well, we found that things that tend to trend were the things that people understood. Like there was a Donald Trump scam. When he was being impeached, there were lots of scammers kind of using that as a pretext. So during that time, we saw this increase in vishing-related tweets with that specific pretext. And the way we could do this was looking at keywords. So people that put anything that was like phone fraud, phone scam, vishing, phone call fraud, anything with that, we could then pull that tweet and then look at the context of the tweet. But across the board, across the 3 years that we looked at, bank card fraud was the most common one, which makes sense because it's a very common attack that people will phone up and pretend to be working at a bank and say your details have been hacked, and then ask you to give them information to help you get your card back. And usually that's an attacker because the bank don't actually call you and ask for information. You'll get a phone call to say, call them. And this was something that was across the 3 years. But then after the pandemic, we saw vaccine scams. We saw lots of track and trace scams. So what it tells us is the public perception kind of follows the scams that are happening at the time. So rather than actually being aware of the vulnerabilities of vishing, people are more talking about, I was attacked this way, or talking about the general scams that are trending.
But in that context, we don't get access to the details of those phone calls, right? Because these are just people talking about what might have happened when it happened. And that's different from the data that we collected at SECom.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, so very different. When it comes to the Twitter data, all we have is what we can see. All we have is what we pull. We can't do anything with the data. The beauty about our data is we're in control of it. So our team make the calls. If there's things we want to say, if there's things we want to test, we can do those tests. We can do those things. When it comes to the Twitter, we have absolutely no control whatsoever over the data. We can just see what it tells us.
So let me ask a question that, maybe someone out there is thinking. We have a high ethical standard here in our company. Like we refuse to use certain pretexts, right? So we wouldn't use like a Donald Trump pretext because that political nature divides the country. So we wouldn't use that. We wouldn't use a vaccine pretext because during pandemic, it brought so much fear and there were so many people that died that we would feel that was too negative. So is our data flawed because we refuse to use some of the pretexts that the bad guys are actually using in the Twitter data that you found?
No, not at all. Our data is just different. If we still use the underlying psychological mechanisms, we still use the push of we are triggering emotions which allow us to now influence information elicitation. We're just triggering slightly different emotions. And if you were going in as an untrained social engineer, then probably yes. Because fear is easier, and those negative emotions, it's easier to use them and get the information. So if we said we had a team of non-trained social engineers using our methods, rather than using the methods that, say, attackers would use, yes, that data would be flawed. But our team are trained enough that they know how to use the other psychological mechanisms to pull out the data to the same effectiveness as the attackers, but they just do it without causing any psychological harm. And I want to bring up this point as well, because this is one of the issues with the data that's out there. Either we try and find a phone call that's recorded of an actual scam and analyze it, or if we're going to rely on academics to create that data, for it to be real, they are not going to have the same level of training that our company have, because it's not what they do. They wouldn't be able to get that kind of training. So they would likely have to use those negative methods. It won't work because they won't get the ethical approval. No study would ever allow that kind of approach to obtain that data because it causes psychological harm. So even using the existing data that is out there, it wouldn't be as effective as the data that we have for that reason.
So, I almost feel like, Ryan, we should have done this in the beginning, but maybe we should define phishing for those that may hear this podcast and not even know what it is. Like, what's our definition that we use for this attack vector?
So this is eliciting information over the phone to try to get someone to take an action that may or may not be in their best interest. So typically for our clients, we are trying to test processes that they have that maybe interact over the phone, like password reset policies or data access policies, things like that, where they have specific verification processes in place to determine whether the caller is legitimate or not. And we come in and we test those processes for those clients to basically ask the questions to either impersonate that employee for another part of the company or to just elicit information that's useful to an attacker directly out of that target.
Yeah, I think
all
that's
over
important.
The phone. So there's no video, there's no emails, there's no nothing. It's just one person talking to another person in unscripted conversation.
I'm glad you added that last part, because for us, that's really important, is that we don't use scripts in our vishing, because we don't know the person that's going to answer the phone. So if I give one of our vishers a script and say, you have to read this, it's going to feel very robotic-like. And that's one of the things that I think makes our data stand out, is that we never use robocallers. So there's never been a script or a robocaller or an untrained call center person. It's always a certified, trained social engineer that produces these phone calls. So that kind of adds a whole nother layer to our data with what Abbie said, which is that we're making sure we remain in a space that allows the person to not feel psychological harm when we're done with the call. So that way it's not like, haha, look at all this great data we have and all these people are decimated when we're done, and we did it for science. It's not our case. We wanted to make sure that we can make this and use the data to be educational and help improve people, as opposed to just like showing how cool we are, which would not.
We have to leave. Cool. We have to leave the targets effectively in a mindset that leaves them open to being taught, a teachable moment that leaves them open and not angry at either the tester or their company for performing this test. We need to leave them in a space where they're open to education.
Yeah. So Abbie, why is it important that we kind of focused on the vulnerability factors and the protective factors in the data that we looked at?
Well, because if we can understand factors that lead to increased vulnerability, we can then start training to identify those specific features. Because if we're training, say, okay, well, the way to protect against vishing is to have better technology. And if the technology isn't the issue, we can train as much better technology as we like. It's not going to protect them. We have to dive in and understand where is the vulnerability to then go into that vulnerability and train them to be better. And protective factors, so what factors make people the least vulnerable, they're just as important to understand, because they're going to help us direct our training again. Because if we know, well, if you use these things, this is when you're less vulnerable, or these kinds of people are less vulnerable, let's have a look at this, let's train this.
So, Ryan, one of the things that you and I talked about often in the past is, and we've heard other social engineers make comments on this, is time of day really important? Does it really matter? So how did we go about capturing that? Because, we're calling, like, let's just say the majority of our vishers are in East Coast time, right? In the US, the majority. But we're calling all over the globe. I mean, literally, some of our calls were, literally a 12-hour time difference. Yeah. So how were we able to analyze, and I'll get to Abbie on like the importance of that, but how were we able to capture time of day when we looked at this data?
Yeah. So we started with when our agents or our employees were resolved the tickets. So we do all of these calls and we log them as tickets so we can keep track of data that we're collecting. We took the time that they logged it as a resolved call, meaning they ended the call and they were done and they were going to move on. And we kind of normalized those to East Coast time. And then we took the number that they called and looked up what time zone that area code tends to exist in. And so, the obvious question is, well, phone numbers can travel all around the country anywhere and nobody has their local phone number, but we don't call mobile phones typically for our clients. We call office phone numbers, or we call, the blocks of phone numbers we get are owned by our clients. So we know where their office is. And so if the end user ends up forwarding that phone to their mobile phone, there's not much we can do about that. But for the most part, we normalized the call time to where the area code is, the time zone that the area code is in. So we kind of get the perspective of when the caller made the call, what time of day was it? And then we also get an alternate perspective of the time zone and the time of day that the target was in during that call. So we can kind of look at both directions of that to see which is better for the caller and which is better for the target, or more vulnerable, less vulnerable.
So then, Abbie, why is that important? Like, why is that data important for us to understand, especially when we're trying to issue a report that is meant to help educate the public and educate corporations and make them more secure?
So there's a couple of things. One, let's start with why we did the two perspectives. Because when we started, we just used the time zone of the caller. And flipping it so we can see the time zone for the target allows us those two perspectives. And what this does is allow us to train those who are vulnerable to it and train increased protective factors, but also allows us to train our social engineers. Because if we say, if you phone at this time, this is your vulnerability, and then we can see how many shutdowns and how many compromises they get. But then when we flip it, we see that actually those times completely change. So that means if they don't take into consideration the time zone of the target, their understanding of their approach and what's going to be most effective is wrong. Because they're thinking, oh, well, they're going to be most vulnerable at, say, 7 p.m. But it's not their 7 p.m., it's the target 7 p.m. So if they phone them at a different time thinking this is going to work, they're going to use the wrong approach and it's not actually going to be effective. So we can do it those two ways. But understanding it from the target point of view is really important, because if we can see that someone is most vulnerable at certain times of the day, that's where we can focus on heightened awareness. And we know that this is going to have an effect, because it's like if we look at criminal court cases, there is an effect of time of day of how likely someone's going to be getting a harsher sentence versus a lower sentence. And that is a really important factor. It's the same as grading. If you're a teacher, you're more likely to give harsher grades at certain points in the day. And this can follow things like when your blood sugar dips and increases. So we know that time of day is a really important factor for decision making, and critical decision making too, like security. So we really wanted to include it in here so we can emphasize those points of day that have increased vulnerability factors. Well, we can try and understand why, and then we can try and train them to be, have heightened sensitivity and awareness at these times of day.
Yeah, what excites me about that personally, about that data, is thinking about it from our client point of view. Is if I know client X, if their particular employees are the most vulnerable Wednesday at 3 p.m., like we actually have something actionable. We can tell that client, like, hey, why don't you encourage breaks? Like, why don't you encourage a 20-minute walk at 3 p.m. on Wednesdays for every one of these call center employees, right? Like that should be a mandatory break time. Because if we know that that's your highest point of vulnerability, then getting them up out of the desk, going outside, taking a quick walk might be the very thing that makes them not fall for a vishing scam. So like I like having that, to me, is with sometimes I feel like with social engineering, our answers are always, okay, more education, keep them alert. But now if you have this kind of data, it's like you can actually say, oh, do this physical thing. And it's like the blinky box everybody wants for the network. Like we're now giving them a blinky box for the human. Like, here's something, go take a walk, get on the treadmill, go get some coffee, go punch a wall.
What I would do
whatever.
is, if you see a point of time that is particularly increased in vulnerability, rather than making the break at that time, that means at that time, now their awareness is so low. We want to make a break just before that time. We see when it starts to dip, because usually what you see is heightened awareness and then a big decrease. Same as you see with energy levels, particularly on the typical American diet, where energy, because it isn't the healthiest diet, and this is a really important point, we do see energy levels dip up and down a lot. And with the dipping of energy levels with nutrition comes increased awareness, because it has those mood changes. So if we can see this quick dip just before that dip, as it starts to decrease, that's where we want to put a break. So this time of day is really important, but it also allows us to see kind of, where is it within the 9 to 5 typical time, or is it outside of those? Because if our trainers and our clients are just training 9 to 5 awareness, but actually the heightened sensitivity is after those hours of people coming in earlier, people staying late, and they're just focusing on that normative 9 to 5, well, they're missing a trick. And that's where people are going to start attacking once they see that, or just before work or just after work, they're most vulnerable, because a target doesn't stop being a risk factor to a company once it's outside of company hours. They're still a risk factor to the company, even on non-company time, because they're part of that company.
Which is something we've been hearing a lot from, not just from us and our team, but we're hearing this through the industry, is making information security awareness personal. Because if you make it personal, it has a greater effect on your company. And we've been hearing this message now for the last few years and trying to encourage companies to make that security awareness training. Tell them about their kids, tell them how to keep their mom and dad safe, their brothers and sisters, and that will have a greater effect. And this is just more proof of that this data can help kind of prove that.
Well, not only that, but the personalizing of training tends to sink in better, and people take it in when personalized to them, as opposed to the annual CBT that people watch that has nothing to do with them and their lives. When you really do focus on that person in their department, them specifically, and how they're vulnerable, it really personalizes it, and then they take ownership of it, and then they carry that through for the rest of their life, inside, outside work, to new companies, to old companies. Like it permeates them more by making it personal.
Exactly. And what research has shown is that when you have a company and you test their security, it will change depending on the people that you have. So for companies that have a high turnover, say they just do testing once and say, oh, well, these are my points of vulnerability. You have to remember that every person has their points of vulnerability. What time is this person most vulnerable? Who are they most vulnerable to? Well, when that person goes and a new person comes in, well, those factors are going to change. So you need to keep testing the company, because your risk factors are each individual person, not just the factor of time of day. It's time of day for each employee.
Okay, so let's talk about the we touched on it a little bit, Abbie, but with like the ethical part of this, right? Because one of the things we noticed is, all of these reports, these state of reports, have come out in the last few years, and they're really beneficial. And they're analyzing data that either could be found in the wild, which isn't as easy, but a lot of times, like Proofpoint puts one out, they're analyzing phishing data from their platform, right? We know KnowBe4 does similar, analyzing phishing data from their platform. How important do you think it is? And I know I'm setting you up for this one as a scientist, but how important do you think it is that we really have kind of a strict code when it comes to ethical limitations when we start our I don't know if this is the right term, our process for data collection? So we start planning out, like I know we're already planning out what we're collecting for 2023. So we have our 2024 report come out. But how important is the ethical limitations and ethical boundaries being set for data collection in these areas of social engineering?
So it's vital. Any academic will know that before you do any study, the first thing you need to do is have full ethical approval. And you cannot do anything without confirming it with ethics. So if I say I'm going to use these approaches in my ethics, it's approved. I use a slightly different approach. That study cannot be published. I cannot make those actions. It is completely against ethical guidelines. They are there for a reason. It causes psychological harm. It causes psychological damage. And if you create psychological harm or psychological damage to a client, not only is it extremely unethical and unprofessional, you are going to create shame in that person. And that's going to impede training. We don't want to do anything that's going to impede on them being able to improve security, because it's not going to improve security, because they are going to feel ashamed. They are going to feel harmed. And that is not what we want. Also, if we want to pair with academics and we want to do research, and one of the amazing things that we have started doing is pairing with academics and doing research. And we have released a call for further research and collaborations with universities. Now, if we did this and we didn't have the ethical guidelines set up that we do, say we followed guidelines that a lot of other companies do, we did some market research out there and looked at some of the things that other companies do, we have the best ethical guidelines, nearly the only ethical guidelines out there. If we were pairing with academics and with universities, they would not be able to work with us, because it would go against their standards. They would not be able to use any of our data for anything, because the way it has been collected. So there's so many reasons why these ethical guidelines are here, for harm, for research, and morally. If we are going to be hired, why would a client want us to come in and create harm to all of their employees who now are going to be bigger security risks because they feel shame and because we have caused psychological damage? That goes against the point of what we do.
You read my mind with my next question. I was going to say something that I was going to hopefully watch you clutch your heart in pain, but now I don't get to say it. But I'm going to say it anyway. I was going to say, what if I don't care about academics? And what if academics? What if I'm not an academic? So what if I don't care? Then why do I need to care so much about ethics? Because the bad guys don't care about ethics. So why do I have to be forced to caring about ethics in my research? But what you said is something that we argue all the time, because we have seen this, and not forget malicious people, like real bad social engineers, but we've seen supposed professionals use pretexts that are horrific, like telling a company there's no bonus money, but then saying, oh, click here to get your bonus, or during the height of a pandemic, wearing a gas mask to break into a building, having banners that say, we welcome con men. Like, these things are the height of lack of ethics that we see happening in the community. And what you said at the end, I think, is such an important point, is that now you have a client who's looking out there for someone to hire to go, hey, like, how do we do this work? And if they're caring about their people, they don't want to go to someone who's going to come and punch all their people in the throat and then laugh about it. They're going to want somebody with some morals to help say, like, we really care about your people. We want them to not be harmed. So let's say there's somebody, we get this all the time. All three of us get this. People reach out to us. I want to get into the field. I want to start a company. I want to do that. And we love helping people get into the field. So let's say they don't work here. So how does a company start to develop the ethics and morals so that when they're doing this work, that they have a basis, so they're doing it the right way and not just following the paths of those who are just out to win?
So it really goes back to the foundation. You can't build ethics on top of what's already there. It's like, if I do a study, I can't start the research and then have ethics. It doesn't work that way. And it will impede on the process, because you've got to pause it. You've got to stop it completely. You've got to go all the way back to the foundation and say, from this point onwards, these are the things we are going to do. Nobody can move forward without doing these things. And there is no other way to do it. It's got to be disruptive, because if you are doing any kind of process that doesn't follow ethical guidelines, it needs to stop. It cannot be edited so that it's slightly different. You cannot do something and then go, oh, that probably wasn't ethical. What can I do to reverse the damage? Damage is done. You've just got to strip away what you have, put those ethical foundations in, and then move forward. But there's another reason that I want to touch on about, why do we care about these ethical guidelines, and why should we care about what academics think, which I took personally.
It still hurts a little?
It still hurts, but I'm getting through it.
It's fine.
I'm trying to work through
example.
it.
I know a good therapist I can recommend.
Thanks, Chris.
No problem.
So why should we care about academics? So because they are our foundation of knowledge. So if we want to help our clients protect against security, and we want to use methods which will be just as effective as those negative emotions, where are we getting our knowledge from? We're getting it from scientists. We're getting it from peer-reviewed academic empirical papers that have been tested and validated for reliability and validity. That's where our information comes from. We are founded in our scientific principles. How can we do that training if the science doesn't exist? So we want to create that science. We want to develop that understanding. We can't do that if we're not using ethics, which is so important. You wouldn't trust results of a study that didn't have ethical guidelines, and one, it wouldn't be published anyway. So we need that for that reason also.
Well, we also, there's another way to approach this, and to kind of talk to Chris's question of how do companies start this and do this ethically. You have to reframe your goals when you develop one of these programs, right? So it's some people want to win at every aspect, and that is, that's natural behavior to want to be successful at everything you do.
Yeah.
But when you're developing one of these programs, to stay ethical, you have to think about what is your goal of the program. It's to educate people, and which means you need to leave them in a spot to be educated, which means you can't shame them. You can't make them angry. You can't have intense fear where now they can't deal with whatever you're talking about. So to build a corporate program like this really comes down to defining your goal of wanting to educate people. And when a professional social engineer comes up with a pretext to do this test, you have to think about how is this going to affect the target? And just take that extra step to say, if I say I'm giving bonuses out and bonuses have already been said that they're not being given out, how do you think that's going to affect the target? Probably very negatively. Can we change that so we're not so negative, but we still get the opportunity to test people? You really need to frame your pretext and the general program to accomplish your goal, and not just to win in the end.
I love it. Okay, I got a question I want to ask all three of us, okay, as a final. So Ryan, I'm going to start with you, just to get like kind of a practitioner, academic practitioner standpoint, okay? So what do you think the future landscape for vishing attacks, and not just the science part, but actual vishing attacks, and then also like understanding those attacks is coming up for this year?
Well, we've been seeing lots of public notices of companies being attacked via vishing, and whether it's these combination attacks of phishing and vishing, or whether it's the two-factor authentication fatigue attacks, where they're getting someone on the phone and saying, just to make these stop, just authorize it and get people to do stuff. We're seeing an uptick in that because the training for vishing is very sparse. So not a lot of people are not even aware of the attack vector, but then also how to deal with the attack vector. So getting that training to be more publicly noticed is going to help with defending that threat landscape, because the attackers are always going to try to be a couple of steps ahead of whatever the defenders are doing. So now that people are not trained and they don't know how to deal with vishing, they're using it more and more and more and becoming much more successful with it. And so the understanding of it is just making it public. These, like the report that we're putting out, I think is a great step forward to show people that this attack is real, that it happens more frequently than you think, and that all of these stories of people being vished for various different pretexts are not one-offs. These are trends. These are the movement of this attack vector. Phishing had its day where no one really saw it for a little while and everyone thought it was just spam, and all of a sudden it started taking over companies. Well, vishing is on that track. Companies are being breached every day due to some random, all you need is one phone call to get that one piece of credential that you need to get into the company and cause devastation. So I think vishing as an attack vector is going to increase, which will bring a level of understanding just because of the publicity of it. But then hopefully that will bring in more awareness training related to that to make all of the potential targets a little bit more secure, aware of just that that attack vector. I mean, it's going to roll with itself, right? The more attacks that happen, the more people are going to be aware of it. And then people are going to say, oh, I need to do something about this. And then they're going to start training on it.
Yeah, that's great. That's a good answer. Thank you. And then Abbie, coming at this from like a scientific behavioral analysis standpoint, what do you see as the future landscape for vishing attacks and our understanding of these attacks?
I think the understanding has nowhere else to go except from an increased collaboration between academics and industry, because there's no way else around it. If we don't have that increased understanding, we can't train. Academics want that increased understanding, one, just for knowledge's sake, but also because they partner and they train with industry. Industry now, they can't look to the science for help. So we've got to start creating it. Academics can't go out and create it on their own. As we said, there's ethical limitations. There's limitations with methodology that they can't do them in the lab because it's not authentic. It doesn't reflect real life situations. So they're going to have to partner with industry. And what we're going to see now is the industries they're going to partner with, they have to be ethically represented, because otherwise that partnership can't happen. So if industries want to work with academics and create the data, they've got to step up too. So they've got to start sorting out their ethics. They've got to make sure that they are using appropriate methodology. So we're going to see that change, hopefully in the right direction, because companies want to be successful. They want to know what's going on so they can better train. So that, like I said, there's no other way to go but that collaboration. I see this collaboration really starting to take off, and the understanding, I think, as Ryan said, it's everywhere now. We are an era that lives on our phone. If you want to hack anybody now, it's going to be on their phone because it's always in our hand. So it's always going to be a security risk. So the more that it's a risk, the more we have to take note, and the more we want to understand, we need to create collaborations between industry and research. And it's been great that we are starting to bridge that gap through social engineer already.
Yeah, and my answer for the future landscape for phishing attacks is similar to Ryan's. It's kind of like a combination of both of yours, but something that Ryan said is something I was actually thinking about when preparing for this podcast. I remember the year when phishing, I was trying to talk to reporters and stuff about phishing, and they were like, it's really not that big of a deal. Everyone gets spam. And then Stuxnet, right? You're probably too young, Abbie, but Stuxnet happened, right? And then Stuxnet was kind of like, secret squirrel. No one wanted to talk about it. But then there was this German foundry. You might remember this one, Ryan, where they got that email and the foundry almost blew up because someone had put a piece of malware in there that attacked the PLCs, and the foundry superheated, and they had to shut the whole thing down. And all of a sudden, I was getting flooded with calls on what's happening. How did they do this? And I'm like, a phishing email, one phishing email. And now jump forward. This is like, we're going back 10 or 12 years when that happened. So now jump forward 12 years, and like Toyota lost $34 million to 3 phone calls, right? 3 phone calls, and they lost $34 million. Twitter, 1 phone call, and an 18-year-old gained access to people's Twitter accounts like President Obama, right? I mean, to Bill Gates, and then was able to steal hundreds of thousands of dollars in a matter of hours from the public. Now, you look at some of these cases, if you want to even go, if you want to call small end, but this is even more devastating, the number of grandparents that are having their lives ruined by being called by phone scammers and getting them to transfer $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 to help their quote unquote grandkids. These attacks are devastating on companies and on individuals, and they're so easy. And we're all falling for it. And because, like Abbie said, our phone's in our hand all the time. This is the way we work. It's the way we live. It's the way we communicate. So getting a call on that device, and if it looks legit and it sounds legit, we're falling for it. And also, I was thinking this morning about, for the last 2 recessions that we've had in this country, we've always seen InfoSec be a pretty strong industry. But now we're hearing people in our communities getting laid off. It's the first time, right, in years that we're hearing this. That's a scary thing, because you think the work's not stopping. It's not like they're laying them off because, InfoSec has gotten better, so we don't need this many people anymore. We're more secure. So now they took a team, let's say, of 20 professionals. They reduced it by 50%, and those 10 people have to do the work the 20 were doing just previously. Holy mackerel, right? And now we're like, but you got to stay secure. But you got to keep doing it. You got to stay on top of it. But now you're 50% less than the people you had just a moment ago. That opens up vulnerability like I don't think we truly understand yet. So I don't want to be like a doomsday, sayer, but I think that for what I foresee coming for this year is that we're going to see a massive increase in vishing being used as either the stage of attack or in the multi-stage attacks, like you said, Ryan, where we're seeing it as stage one of a dual attack, like with phishing being involved, like we did with Toyota, right? They called, then they sent an invoice, and those invoices got paid. And we're going to see that more and more and more, I think, as the time goes on, because we're seeing more stress in the workforce, less people doing the same amount of work or more work, and that is creating vulnerability with our people, because our mental health capacity globally, not just in this country, is at a diminishing rate. So I don't want to kind of like be like, okay, guys, hey, we're all screwed. Have a nice time. See you next month. Right. So like maybe one final question. Can either of you think of anything that we can leave on a positive note? Like, what is our hope and our with issuing the State of Vishing, our inaugural 2023 State of Vishing Report? What is our hope that this will do for the community, for businesses, for corporations, for individuals? Let's start with you, Ryan, since we're going to get science from Abbie.
Yeah. So I just want to point out, and I don't want to steal Abbie's thunder here, but there was just one thing that I found in that report that was pretty interesting, that showed a glimmer of hope, which was when we compared the data between up to 2021 and then 2022 data, we saw that our calls that we were registering, the compromise rate went down due to the education that people were getting. And I think that's the step. Is it might have been an incremental change, but it was a step in the direction that we all need to go. And so I think doing this testing and educating your people and keeping them on point by not doing a single annual test, actually training them throughout the year, testing them throughout the year, getting them used to dealing with those type of phone calls and how to deal with those phone calls will help to solve this problem.
What do you think, Abbie?
Yeah, I was going to say education. And I'm biased because I'm the director of education, but education really is the most important factor. And this report is very educational. We highlight general risk factors, we highlight general trends, but it's also that point towards everything is going to be about education. If we don't understand how something works, as both a trainer of social engineers and a trainer in a company where you're trying to train security, if you don't understand how it works, you don't know what barriers you're setting, you don't know what barriers you're overcoming, you don't know what limitations there are, so you can't be the most effective. When you understand it, we can create that science, we can create that better, protect those better protective factors, and we can work to secure our industries. We can work to secure our data. And as Ryan said, we've seen an increase in security. We've seen an increase of once we start educating, people become most aware. And in the literature already, we know that one of the greatest risk factors is a lack of understanding. If we don't understand something, we're going to fall for it and we're not going to protect ourselves. This report really highlights the importance of education.
Awesome. Well, this was a great discussion today. Dr. Maroño, thank you. Ryan, thank you. We as a team are very excited about the inaugural State of Vishing Report for 2023. We hope that you find it really valuable to your organization and to your families, even learning about this vector and what can be done. Just to mirror what we said in conclusion, adding empathetic to our type of training and being an empathy-based, compassion-based type of training for your people can make huge volumes of difference in getting your population to be aware of what vishing is and not make compliant decisions because of fear, but because they really want to be secure. They want to protect you and your company and themselves from this ever increasing vector. If you haven't yet seen the report, you can go to social-engineer.com. There's a menu item for it, or there's a huge banner right on top where you can grab that report and download it. We look forward to more discussions on this. Please ping us on any one of our social media applications. Ask questions about it. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this report or any ideas that you have. If you can think of something that can make it better for next year, please feel free to reach out to us and let us know, so that way we can continually improve the data in that report and the way that we're presenting it to make it more useful for those of you who will be using it for corporate awareness. Thanks for joining us this month. We look forward to chatting again with you next month, where Ryan and I will be back with another really fascinating topic for CISOs and anyone interested in cybersecurity. Until then, we'll see you.